Good evening. I know that you'd like to wait a little longer, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Would you stand with me and let us know? Father, thank you for the difference you make in our lives. Thank you for the gift of music. And we pray as we make music this evening that you would be pleased. A smile would come upon the divine brow, and you laugh at us and enjoy this evening with us in your giftedness. In Jesus' name, amen. Please be seated. The director of the affairs this evening has asked me to say a few words of introduction to what we're doing tonight. So, a very abbreviated version. I think you could make the case that Western culture is rooted in two basic primary roots, the Judeo-Christian and the Greco-Roman. So the fact that we sing songs in church, which is, I think that's, we've all grown up singing songs in church. Why do we do that? Well, it's rooted in the practice of the earliest believers, which in turn is rooted in the Jewish practice. The Jewish synagogue, the practice would be to be singing psalms. And so the earliest Christians, mostly Jews, would have done the same thing. So we have a tradition, a musical tradition in church going way, way back. And then it's probably not surprising then to think in terms of European or Western history, to think of the importance of music in connection with church, because the church was the center of everything. The church was the center of life, the center of the village, the center of the town. And so it's not just music, it was everything that was related to the church. And so when you start thinking about Europe and its development, a large part of music, the classical tradition came out of the church. When you think of someone like Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the earliest classical composers, this is the very context of Christianity and of faith. So we have, it's not surprising then we have something of a background from the church, that singing comes out of this church sort of background. Then we also have this other tradition, and at about the time, so going back then to the Greco-Roman practices, so in the Renaissance, they rediscovered Greco-Roman practices. And so they rediscovered Greek plays which used a chorus, which as best as we can tell involved some sort of chanting apparently. A group of people would play like a character and would chant. And that seems to be one of the origins of, for example, even in the Christian tradition later, possibly a Gregorian chant in the church. And then by the time, about 1700 or so, we have the development of something called opera. I'll come back to that word a little bit later. But opera, particularly in Italy, becomes something separate from the church itself, but it's drawn on the vocal and the choral and the musical traditions of the church. So the first part of our program tonight is going to be the offering of a few, we call them arias, they're all arias, are they all arias? They're solos. Arias would be something sung in an opera itself, but examples of this, and the director, the aforementioned director is going to present each of those, and I'll be back in a few minutes to introduce the scene itself.
Yes, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about each of these selections that you'll be hearing, what was going on in opera stylistically, so that you could better appreciate what you're hearing. You'll be familiar with probably a couple of these things. One of them is probably the most iconic aria known to 21st century audiences. But actually, opera, my dear husband, you said 1700, you meant 1600 in Renaissance Italy in Florence. And this is key because up to this point, there was no solo singing in an artistic sense. Everything in the church had been done with a body of people, what we know as a chorus. And in the ancient Greek tradition, there was Orpheus, who was a legendary Greek hero who could sing so beautifully and play his stringed instrument of lyre that he could charm the animals and tame them. And so this Orphic tradition was part of what went on in Florence when the Italian aristocrats in Florence were trying to recreate the Greek tragedy from antiquity. They decided to try to sing the texts. And so the idea of solo singing was born, a completely new concept in composed artistic types of music. And of course, there were no public concerts in this day. If there were, they really were in the homes of noblemen and aristocrats, wealthy people for private entertainment. So in the earliest part of opera, around 1600, the first opera was performed around 1601. And the most important part of the opera was the text. It just happened to be sung by solo people with orchestral accompaniment. And so opera would grow and develop quite a bit in the early days, and there has always been a tension between the text, the story, and the vocalism and the music. And so even to this day, there is this conflict, although really, ideally, it should all be one unified whole, and hopefully what you see tonight will be exactly that. This aria that Lily Slater will sing for us is very familiar to many of us. It's come down to us in the 24 Italian arias, which are the bedrock of teaching vocalism in the classical sense. And this is from an opera that was composed about 100 years later, actually in 1698. It takes place in Naples, and the composer was Alessandro Scarlatti, who was a very influential composer of his day, and he was really the one who brought opera to the forefront outside of Florence and Rome. And by, I think about 30 years after people began trying to do opera, we had public theaters opening to give concerts of operatic theatrical works in public places. So that was also part of the innovation. What you will hear is a very common form for the day, what we call in music a da capo aria, which simply means it's a three-part aria. It has a first theme, and then a middle related section of great contrast, and then a return of the first material, but this time with some vocal improvisations to make it interesting. And Lily does some of those improvisations, which are very appealing. And so you will hear a very light and bouncy sort of accompaniment. The orchestras of the day were still small. When opera got started, the orchestras were just 16 or 17 people, quite small. And so by this point, the orchestras might have been a little bigger, but the prominent thing about the aria you will hear is the voice itself. The music is bouncy and light, like I said. The text is minimal, and the voice is the most important part of what you'll hear. All four arias that you will hear tonight are love songs. And in this piece, the character is singing his undying love to his love.
Oh,
This next aria is from Mozart's great masterpiece, Don Giovanni. Fast forward about 100 years in opera. This opera was written in Italian, although it was premiered to great acclaim in Prague, where Mozart was really a rock star. And this is sung by the aristocratic nobleman Don Ottavio, who has seen his fiancée really viciously attacked physically by Don Giovanni, and he is filled with remorse that he was not able to protect her. So he sings a two-part piece. The first part is what we call recitative, which is Italian for recitation, and it was something that was invented in Italy to that was somewhere between singing an aria and speech, and it is basically a sung monologue. And in the tradition by Mozart's day, the recitatives could happen as a monologue, they could happen with several characters, and in the recitations, or recitatives, the action would be forwarded, many things would happen, or a character would be alone on stage talking about a situation that has filled him or her with some sort of anxiety, grief, joy, whatever the situation is. And then we transition to the aria itself, which is a very lyric, stately, beautiful sung tune in which he, again, pledges undying loyalty to his fiancée. So this is Dalla sua pace with Nick Arnberger. hear O mio babino caro, and this is probably going to be known to many of you. It's very beautiful and very famous music. And in this piece, the young and beautiful Lauretta is pleading with her father to allow her to marry the man that she loves, and he does not approve of this person. But this young lady has her father wrapped around her finger, so there's really never any doubt. But she sings this beautiful aria, pleading that she be allowed to be with her beloved. So the piece you just heard and the piece that is going to be sung next are both by one of the most beloved Italian operas of all time, Giacomo Puccini. By this point in opera, and both of these operas take place that were composed in the late 1800s, early 20th century. So each of these pieces has been a jump in about 100 years of opera history. And you can hear the development of the music. By this point in time, stories were about real people and everyday real life circumstances. The early part of opera concerned either gods and goddesses or stories about aristocrats. And by this point in time, the text had become very important again. After a couple of hundred years of just real decadence nearly in vocal show-off, we had in Puccini a really perfect marriage of both the text and the beautiful singing and the music that fleshes out all of the emotions and colors of human existence. And let me just, before we close this section, refer back a moment. Apparently, in Plato's time of ancient Greece, heaven and earth were two distinct spheres, and the Platonic ideal in that day believed that the human voice in music was the only connection between the two spheres. And that is why the human voice is so important in human history. And we know this today. Singing is an utter expression of our soul. And hopefully in Puccini's music and all the music that you hear, your heart is touched by something intangible in the music and the sound of the voices. And this is the special magic of opera, that the human voice reaches its glorious apex in both functionality and sound and ability matched by exquisite orchestration, theatrical staging, and so we have a very complete moment of human striving expressed in an art form that is really transcendent. It combines all of the art forms: dance, music, singing, theater, visuals, the written and spoken word. And so it is really one of the most important developments, we believe, in in Western music. And so now Emma's going to sing the third act, very poignant farewell aria. Mimi is breaking up with her boyfriend, and it's because she's actually dying. And nobody knows that she's dying. And this time, tuberculosis was a very killer disease. It had been all throughout the 19th century. It shows up in many works, many operatic works. And because she's dying, they're poor artisans, and her boyfriend knows that he can't do anything for her. He doesn't have any money. And so he's been kind of angry and mean to her in an attempt to create distance and detach. And she realizes what he's been doing. So in this moment, after a big argument, she says, "Goodbye," without bitterness, without rancor. The set now, so you can take a stretch. Just take us a couple minutes to do this, and then we'll reconvene and my husband will give us some information.
words to kind of set up the scene that we're about to enjoy. Give me a little audience participation here. I'm going to set up what's all involved in opera. So let me just start with this. Dimension 1 would be what I'm doing, standing in front of a group of people, an audience, and speaking to them, and possibly in a room of this size. So raise your hand if you've ever done this or you think you could be comfortable doing this. Hands. Wow, I'm already starting this. Well, okay, thank you. All right, let's add dimension number 2. And that is, for example, if the aforementioned director had given me 2 pages to memorize. And now I have to remember those words, and I have to come out and give those words in the exact way that they're written. Memorizing them, so I've got them exactly, and I'm presenting them exactly as written without any mistakes, right? So how many of you have done something like that, or think you could handle it? Okay, we still got a number of people over here, dramatic people over here, so that probably is cheating. All right, dimension 3 is projection. Now, without a mic, I want you to move from this room to the chapel auditorium, right? No mic, and possibly at least an audience, a group, a setting as large, at least as large as Spence Auditorium. Without any mic, can you project and be heard by someone way in the back, right? So that's what I mean. How many have done something like that or think they could do that? Still got this group over here is going to stay. All right. Dimension 4, I'm now going to add another person, right? Now you're not alone. There's another person involved. Say, for example, now you're going to do the aforementioned director has now given 2 of us a script that use exact words. You memorize the words, you have to recite the words, you have to respond. So now you not only have to know your words, but you have to know the other words, right? You have to know when to come in, so you have to know what the other person is saying too. So you have to memorize these words, memorize what the other person is saying, and be able to respond at a split second. And if you're, again, someone like the aforementioned director, you might choose someone that's very different from you in look, like me and maybe Dr. Trump, right? Something totally different look. I thought I'd get a bigger response with that. Okay. Dimension 5 is now a skit with a bunch of people on a stage. So now you not only have to memorize what your words are, what your lines are, but you have to memorize the lines of the other people. And now you're moving around on the stage. You have to remember where you're supposed to be. You have to remember to not trip on the carpet. Or possibly now that you have costumes, you have to get trip on your robe, which you're possibly wearing. You have to be able to pour some tea. You have to stab someone with a dagger. Actually, remember you have the dagger, and you have to stab them in the right place. So now we're dealing with a scene which involves a lot of movement, possibly having to move around. How many have done that? Or I don't know. Hands grab over here. Okay. So now number 6. Add music. Right now, you're not just memorizing words, but now you're adding music, and so you have to put the music and the words together. You have to stay on pitch. You have to exude what the feeling of the words are expressing. And again, remembering all the other stuff where you have to projecting without a mic to a large auditorium. So now you're, again, using props and moving around and knowing where everybody is. How many have done that or feel comfortable you could be doing that? Okay. Now, dimension 7 is always having to keep your eye on the conductor, right? So you're not only moving around and knowing what you're supposed to do, what everybody else is saying, but also keeping in mind the conductor. How many are still with me? This group over here. So it's very much like a musical, but I think when you start to compare opera and musical, often I think the vocal demands, I have to talk about the wisdom she would agree with this, there's a certain amount of training that's involved in operatic singing that might not be required for someone in musical theater.
So that's probably the only difference we're talking about here. But remembering also, and you may well be singing in another language as well.
We're often not doing this in English. So, I want you to appreciate what you're about to see here.
This is not easy. It takes a lot of work.
So, the setup for this particular scene. This is a scene from one of Mozart's operas called Così fan tutte, which literally means so they all do. The they here implied are women. Sometimes the English translation is good, women are like that. And the subtitle is School for Lovers. So the scene, this is the last scene in the first act, and what's set up, the scene that's set up here is that there are two couples, let's start with two guys, who are engaged to be married, and they are boasting in a cafe that their fiancés will ever be true. They could never be turned away, they will ever be faithful to them no matter what comes. An older man who is in the cafe says, no way, you're just too young, you don't know women, and I'll make a bet with you that I can in a day have them being unfaithful to you. So they make this bet, and they make this agreement that they will disguise themselves, go off, pretend they've been called off to war or something, come back in disguise and switch and see if they can seduce the fiancé of the friend. Everybody with me here so far? Yes? Raise your hand if you're with me here so far. Okay. So, in this scene then, they have come back in disguise. So you have to pretend with us, everybody pretending with us, that they don't recognize them, and they are now going to be seduced by their friend's fiancé. And the older fellow, Malachi, in this particular presentation, is now going to get the cooperation of Despina, the maid, that's Lily in this particular presentation. And so they're kind of trying to get them to fail, for the women to give in. And of course the men have bet that they won't give in. And so there is this kind of dynamic, multiple things going on at the same time. So let me see, that kind of, there's strange things happening, right? This is a comedy. And comedies usually mean by the end, by the end of the show, that things are all worked out all right. But in the meantime, strange things happen. There are misunderstandings and buffoonery and jokes and that sort of thing. So if you listen carefully, you'll hear some updated lines. You may hear a reference to Andy's or Waffle House or something like that. So this has been updated a bit. Some strange things happen. I think that pretty much I'm sorry? That's it. Okay. What's that? Così fan tutte.